Fritz. Illustrations by Trina S. Hyman. Long ago in Ireland, there lived a man named Columba who loved books. In fact, he was wild for books. But books were still such a new thing in Ireland, they were hard to come by. If someone wanted to read a new book, he might have to walk the length of the land just to find one. If he wanted to own the book, he would have to copy it by hand. Now, if it had been just stories that Columba had wanted, he would have had no trouble. Traveling bands of storytelling poets, bards they were called, were forever stopping by to tell the stories. They were grand old stories, memorized word for word and passed down through the years. After the telling, the bards would jingle a gold bowl that hung by chains from the tips of their spears. They would jingle the bowl right under the noses of their listeners, who were supposed to drop coins into it. If they dropped enough coins, the bards would put their names into fine songs of praise. But if they were stingy, the bards would make up mean songs about their stinginess and sing them over the land. So, of course, people tried to keep on the good side of bards. Columba loved old stories, and because he was the son of a chieftain, he had often studied under a famous bard. But once he had learned to read, nothing took the place of books. He had learned early. When he was still a young boy, a prophet, studying the stars one night, had seen a message cast into the sky. Columba should read, the prophet said. He should begin now. And so the letters of the alphabet had been baked inside a cake, and Columba had eaten the cake. Once the letters were digested, he began practicing, and before long he was writing words on a wax slate and reading them too. Only a few people could read in Columba's day, and many didn't go along with the idea of reading at all. If a person could read, they said, what would happen to memory? Why remember stories when they could be set down in books? Who would need bards? But Columba said there was room enough in Ireland for both bards and books, and both should be honored. Columba grew to be a great giant of a man with a grand voice that could be heard a mile away, and whatever he did totally. Whatever he loved with all of his heart. In addition to books, Columba loved Ireland, every green blade of Irish grass, every square inch of Irish sod, and he loved the church. To show up how much he loved it, Columba gave up worldly ways. He put on a prickly rough shirt made out of the manes of horses and wore it next to his skin. He slept with a stone for a pillow. But neither Ireland nor the church came in the way of Columba's love of books. He was determined to read every book in Ireland and to copy every one that he read. Since books were generally kept in monasteries, Columba spent much of his time walking from one monastery to another. The trouble was that monks in monasteries were sometimes jealous of their books. They liked having an only copy, and when they saw Columba striding down the road, they would give the alarm. Quick, hide the new books, they would say. And when a Columba arrived, they would shake their heads sadly. No new books here. One day, Columba heard that a hermit named Langarad of the Hairy Legs had a book that Columba had never seen. So of course Columba called on the hermit right away. Yes, Langarad of the Hairy Legs said he did have that book, but he would not let Columba see it. No matter how much Columba pleaded, he would not. No, he would not. No, and no again. By this time, Columba's anger was red hot, reaching right to the roots of his hair. May thy books no longer do thee any good, he cried, and off he stamped, his shirt prickling as he went. Another time, Columba's good friend Finian came back from a trip to Rome with a new book. Since Finian was a friend, Columba set off in high spirits with his inks and his pens and his parchment in his satchel. For company, he took with him his pet crane. Finian welcomed Columba to his monastery and said, of course, he can look at the book, but he must not copy it. That night, Columba and his crane went into the library where the book was kept, on the end of a chain locked in a stone wall. Carefully, Columba opened the book, and heaven be praised, what a book it was! Great capital letters with fishes and flowers nestled into them, spiraling circles spilling into margins, and small letters, round and black and bold, sitting side by side in friendship, like fat little birds on a line. "Ah, Crane," whispered Columba, "what a beauty it is! What a beauty!" The next night, after everyone in the monastery was asleep, Columba crept to the library with his pens and his parchment and began copying the book. The next night, too, and the next, and he had no time for the great capital letters or the spiraling circles, but he did get the words down until there was only one night's work left to do. And that night, Finian became suspicious. He sent a messenger to the library, and of course what the messenger found was not one book, but two, with Columba and the candlelight between them. So a great argument arose. Finian said that he had not given permission for his book to be copied, so the copied book belonged to him. Columba said that since he had copied it, the book was his. Neither man would give an inch, and so they went to the High King of Ireland to let him judge. They stood together they stood before the High King, first one giving his arguments, and then the other. The High King bent his head to the left and bent it to the right, weighing the matter between the two men. Then he ruled in favor of Finian. "To every cow belongs her calf," he said, "and to every book its son book." Columba's anger blazed. "It is a wrong judgment," he cried, "and I shall be avenged." Straightway Columba took off for the mountains where his kinfolk lived. His father had many warriors in his service, none of them backward about making war. No sooner had Columba told his story that the men were off marching to meet the army of the High King. Columba went along and prayed. And whether it was the prayers or the fighting that won the battle, who can say? But in the end, the High King was defeated, in a terrible defeat. 3,000 men lay dead on his side, and 1 man dead on Columba's. So for certain, Columba was avenged. Yet he did not feel like a victor. Now that it was over, he felt miserable inside his prickly shirt. 3,001 men who had been alive yesterday were dead today, and all because of one book.
Can I see?
Columba had behaved like a man of the world, not like a man of the church, and he was ashamed. He would not have to punish himself for the worst punishment he could think of, so he vowed to leave Ireland and never set eyes on it again. Sadly, Columba said goodbye to his friends, to his beloved homeland, and to the book he had copied, the cause of his woe. Then he climbed into his boat, the Dewy Red, and with 12 companions and his pet crane, he set sail north for an unknown island to take his punishment. There were plenty of islands to pick from. Columba stopped first at one, then another, but each time that he looked south, he could still see Ireland. Once he thought he had gone far enough, but when he climbed a hill, there was Ireland, green as ever, in the distance. But at last Columba came to the island of Iona. He climbed to the top of the highest hill, squinted south, and when all he could see was the sea and surf, he knew he had found his new home. Columba and his friends built a church, and around it 13 huts, 1 for each man, and around the huts a wall. This was his town, and the people were his family. As time went on, more people joined his family, for Columba was quick to make friends, not only with his neighbours, but with the people from nearby islands, and from those from the main land of Scotland lying to the east. All through the north he travelled, preaching and starting small churches as he went. Once he walked across the whole width of Scotland and persuaded the king himself to become a Christian. Of course, Columba was homesick for Ireland. There was not a bird who flew south that he did not envy its going. And of course, he missed the joy of new books. Still, he had the Bible, the most important book, and he was determined that every church should have its own copy. So night after night, he lined up the letters, round and black and bold. And before he was through, he had made 300 copies of the New Testament in his own hand. Columba was 70 years old and had lived on Iona for 28 years when one day a fleet of boats from Ireland sailed into the harbor. Columba rushed down to the shore to welcome them. 20 bishops were on board, 40 priests and 30 deacons, 90 men in all, and everyone Irish. Columba could not go quickly enough from one to another. They had come, the bishops explained, because there was a trouble at home. It was the bards. They had become so greedy, they weren't content with coins any longer. They had even commanded a king to give them his royal brooch. And if he refused, the bards had threatened to sing songs that would disgrace the king before his kingdom. Now a great meeting had been called, and all the bards were to be banished from the country. Listening to the bishops, Columba was like a man whipped by the winds. How could the bards behave so badly? But banished? How could Ireland get along without its bards? What kind of people would the Irish become without stories and songs to liven them? It was unthinkable. Then come back with us, the bishops and the priests and the deacons begged. Speak at the meeting. Only you can make the kings and bards listen. But how could Columba go when he had vowed not to set his eyes on Ireland again? Yet how could he not go? Night after night Columba lay awake, setting the vow against the stories and the stories against the vow.
I finished, but...
At last he found an answer. He had never vowed not to set foot on Ireland, had he? It was only his eyes he had punished. So he tied a blindfold over his eyes and sailed back to Ireland with the bishops and the priests and the deacons. He took his place in the prow of the first boat, for though he couldn't see, he wanted to feel himself drawing closer to Ireland. The meeting had already assembled when Columba arrived. All the local kings of Ireland were there, all the nobles and all of the churchmen and 1,200 bards. When they saw Columba blindfolded being led before them, they rose in his honor. And when Columba began to speak, they smiled at each other, for neither the blindfold nor the years had made a difference in the wonderful voice. Not in the speech, for who but Columba could find words that would set the bards and the kings both at ease? By the end of the meeting, the bards had agreed to the rules that would keep them in order, and the kings agreed to let the bards stay. Then Columba went back to Iona, his homesickness healed like a scab over a sore, for hadn't he felt the good Irish sod again once under his feet? Hadn't he smelled the green smell of the land? Hadn't he heard the fine Irish voices of the bards singing the old songs? And now he was in haste to get back to his island and to take off his blindfold, for in his satchel he had a new book that the bishops had given him, a fine, fat book, it felt. A feast, surely. Columba lived for 6 more years, happy with his family and his work. And when he died, he was doing what he liked best. He had his parchments, his pens, and his inks before him. He died in the middle of copying a sentence.